going through a presentation, I want to tell you that it should be a scientific journey that should always be filled with doubts and questions whether what you are telling, what I am telling you guys is right or no, and that as new information comes, I should be able to say I was wrong and modulate. That it should not be advocacy alone. It just should not be a dogma that I say you need to follow. Whenever you follow it, and always there should be a balance. I should show, hey, these people think this way, these people think the other way. I don't necessarily know who's right. So one of the most important aspects of nutrition is the brain. Now the brain came about through years and years of evolution, and there are a group of researchers, amongst them Alilio and Wheeler, and they coined the term expensive tissue hypothesis. So there is a whole bunch of stuff here that is trying to tell you what is the optimal diet based on how our digestive anatomy is, what our stomach does, what our pancreas does, how do we do fermentation, and how do we neutralize toxins that we come across in our diet. But before we get into all of that, we need to address this issue. Why is our brain so enormously large? How did it come about? So this is several million years of evolution, and our brain has rapidly increased over the last million years from about 400 grams to about 1500 grams. So roughly from what it was about less than a pound to about 3 pounds. So this is an amazing feat. And why did this happen? You know, if we want to define what diet we should eat, we have to define why did this happen. So there is something called an encephalization index. What that basically means is that if you look at your brain mass and you divide that by your body mass, so in other words, 65 kilogram person with a 1.5 gram brain, and you come up with a ratio, and for humans it's amazingly about 4.8, and our closest ancestor, our closest primate is only 1.9, and animals are much lower than that. So we have a huge brain for our body size. So that's the second concept that I wanted to tell you. Number one, our brain became enormously large. Number two, we have a huge brain for our body size. Number three is that it takes a lot longer for the human brain to mature, many, many years compared to that of our closest relative. Larger brain, it is much larger compared to our body size. It takes a lot longer to mature. So here it is trying to show why this happens. So when you have a larger brain, this gives you cognitive ability to find better food, so you get a higher quality food, and by this I don't mean a value judgment. And that higher quality food will give you more energy to make your brain even larger. So what is higher quality food? So higher quality food is by design something that you don't need to process as much. If you have to take a raw material and process it to the final form and refine it, that's a lower quality food. And you will soon find out what is higher quality food versus lower quality food. And as your food quality becomes higher, you don't need a digestive system that is basically extracting things from its rawest, purest, and most unrefined form. So you can deal with a smaller gut. You don't have to have such a large gut. So what are the benefits of a large brain? Number one is that it gives you what is called cognitive buffering. Your brain is smart. You can find better food. And as humans can cooperate, we give energy subsidies to pregnant women. They don't have, back in the olden days, they didn't have to go hunt for food. Children will be given while they're growing energy subsidies. There is a social aspect of it. And then this is an extremely important aspect, which is cooking. So why is cooking important? Cooking is important because you are pre-digesting your food outside even before you ate it. And cooking is an important way in which we neutralize toxins and bacteria so that we don't stress our gut. Now, how do we pay for it? Because let's say you suddenly went from a small mom and pop store to a Walmart, right? You'd have to have a lot more expense. So that means that should we increase our energy expenditure? Should we need more food to feed our brain? Or instead of doing that, just shaft the employees. In other words, become a Walmart, but don't treat your employees well so that you can feed your brain. So in other words, you reduce the size of your gut. You reduce your stomach becomes smaller so that you are spending less energy processing the food. And the second thing would be bipedal mobility. In other words, instead of walking on all fours, which is much more energy expensive, walk on 2 feet. Humans do this very well. It's very energy expensive to produce new children. So we have reduced birth interval, which is same as having a longer gestational period. We don't have 8 size litter, we have 1 litter. We have a larger neonate so that it can survive, and we have a longer reproductive lifespan, 25, 30 years. So the energy expensive tissue hypothesis was so important that I wanted to spend time on it. I wanted you to realize that how the brain is contributing to our diet. So the cost of the brain is about 11 watts for every kilogram. The rest of the body is not that expensive, about 1 watt. And so like we've already discussed, the way to feed our brain, because in nature what happens is that you want to live the most efficient way possible. You don't want to increase your energy expenditure because you'll have to spend more time finding it. You want to feed your brain, which is giving you an advantage, but you want to reduce your energy expenditure elsewhere, so you reduce energy expenditure in other tissues, and humans found the gut tissue, the digestive system, to reduce it, and we talked about the other two. So here is the paper by Lilio and Wheeler, and here they're taking a 65 kilogram person, and they're saying, hey, what should we expect in terms of brain size? So brain size is about 1.3 kilograms, but really the brain size should be less than 300 grams. The gut size is smaller by almost 1 kilogram, 1,000 grams. So the way we paid for our expensive brain is by reducing the gut. So you would say, now it's beginning to make sense, because if we reduce our gut, our constraints of what we can eat that is good for us is definitely going to be higher. So here is a little, what should I say, a jab at people who promote a whole food plant-based diet versus an animal source diet. So if you're eating an animal source diet versus a whole food plant-based diet, this plant-based diet is deficient in key nutrients, and you will find out what those are. You need to eat a larger volume. You need to process it. You'll be eating for a lot longer duration. You can't eat for short periods of time if you're eating raw food. You will take more toxins, and so you will need more antioxidants. You will need to ferment that fiber, and that's very important because we're going to talk a lot about fermentation. The plant protein is not complete, and this is also another thing we will talk about, that there is not essential fatty acids in that. In fact, there is somebody sitting in the audience who sent me a card saying that, hey, Dr. Ali, can you measure and see if my essential fatty acids are normal, right? On the other hand, animal source food, more complete amino acids, so the protein is more complete. It's volumetrically dense, energy dense, nutrient dense, so you need to eat less. There is lower processing requirement, especially if you cook the food. You are already pre-processing it, so you don't need to digest it as much. And there is reduced eating time so that we can spend time discussing these things. So here it is, the foraging and eating behavior of primates other than Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens means us. Consuming food needed to become much more efficient process, and judging by our closest evolutionary neighbor, eating was not only inefficient, it was a full-time job. There were simply too few hours in the daylight available to meet the caloric requirement of our demanding large brain using the gathering systems of chimpanzees. They eat for about 7 to 8 hours to gather all their food. It is estimated that if we ate like our chimpanzee ancestors, it would require 9 hours per day to gather and eat enough calories to sustain our bodies if we ate the same low quality food that they eat. So I have gone through most of this, so I'm going to skip that.
Quick question, that most primates are vegetarian?
No.
Okay.
But they do eat a lot of plant material that is raw, that they need to process.
But they're not vegetarians?
But they're not, because they eat insects and other things.
Okay, but.
And they also don't cook.
Right.
Yeah, like they say,
coming though.
like they say, show me the secret to man's red fire.
Yeah.
So to summarize, what are the constraints posed on us? One is that we have a large brain that we need to feed it. Number two, we have specialized because we now have a large small intestine. So here it's important to pause and get you guys involved. We have a mouth, an esophagus, a stomach, a duodenum, and then what comes after that?
Small intestine?
Small intestines, right?
Right.
So the largest part of the human digestive system is what?
The intestine. Small intestine.
The small intestines. 56 to 60%. Now, many of you think that fiber is very good, and I have a doubt that when I tell people that, hey, fiber is useless, don't eat it, because I want to put some balance into that. Where do you think we metabolize? Where do you think we use the fiber? Do we use it in our stomach, in our duodenum, in our small intestine?
Large intestine.
So the only place where we use fiber is at the end of our digestion, and our colon is rudimentary. It's about less than 15% of the digestive system. It's got limited fermenting capacity, and you ferment and make B12 in the colon, but you can't absorb it. Okay? Now, we also have an acid-based digestion. Why is that important? Because what that means is that the food that we eat is not broken down by bacteria. It's broken down by stomach acid with pepsin. And so in other words, to digest and absorb protein, B12 and minerals, you need stomach acid. And if you eat a lot of fiber along with your protein, you will not absorb the protein and you will not absorb the minerals. Here is another important limitation posed on us. We don't have a very strong pancreas. Now, what does pancreas do? It releases insulin. And why do we need insulin? Insulin is needed so that we can process carbohydrate. So we are bestowed with a pancreas that cannot handle a large glycemic load or a glycemic index, because if you give it a large amount of sugar or carbs, the pancreas simply dies and you get failure to make the insulin. So does everybody believe in the fairness and balance issue, I have to say, does everybody believe in the expensive tissue hypothesis? There are many people who would like to put it down. And I have gone through these papers, and I'm simply not convinced. I think that the expensive tissue hypothesis that our brain poses limitations on our diet is absolutely right. Okay, so I have organized this presentation so that at the end of this talk, we're going to say, hey, I know what the optimal diet is for me. I know what's the best thing for me to eat. So we're going to take on fermentation. So the fermentation can either occur in the foregut, that is, it can occur in the stomach, or in the hindgut, like we do at the end of our digestion. Or you can have an acid-based, enzyme-based digestion. In other words, you are breaking down the food with acid, with pepsin, with amylase, with lipase, which are things that break down protein, starch, and fat. And those are listed down there. So this is a ruminant, a cow. This is an amazing animal. I think without ruminant, life on earth would not have been possible. And they're especially good for us because they don't compete with us for any food resources. So they have 4 stomachs, a rumen, a reticulum, and an omasum, and an abomasum. So let's see what they do. How many of you knew before coming here as to that fiber is made from sugar molecules? 1. Anybody? So if you take sugar molecules and you pack them like this, you will get fiber. On the other hand, if you pack them a little differently, you will get starch. So this is packed in such a way that you're getting starch, and this is packed in such a way that you're getting grass. What is the most abundant biologic material that animal can consume? Grass. By far. The earth is covered with so much grass that we can feed all the ruminants.
That's great.
And the ruminants take this grass, which has cellulose, and we cannot break down cellulose because we lack the enzyme. They put it into the rumen, where it is mechanically processed, it's broken up. Then they bring it back up to the mouth, chew it to the cud, and then send it back.
Wow.
And what they are doing is that they are taking the fiber, breaking it up so that the bacteria that are there in the rumen can work on it and convert the food from fiber to fat, which is amazing. When you break down carbohydrates, you can make short chain fatty acids. They are called SCFA, short chain fatty acids. So this is the true stomach, where there is an enzyme that breaks down the bacteria so that they can get protein. But before that, they have absorbed a lot of fat. So you can say, I now understand why a cow can eat grass and get so huge and fat. So what is the anatomy of the rest of the animal kingdom?
Excuse me.
So unlike the ruminant, we are hindgut fermenters. We ferment in the colon, which is at the end of the digestive tract. And this is a rat. The rat has fermenting capacity. It's got a huge cecum. The pony, the fermenting capacity is tremendous because the cecum is very large, the colon is very large, it is sacculated. One of our best friends, the dog, is a carnivore. The colon is very small, there is almost no cecum, no appendix, and we look very similar to our friend because even though we are sacculated, we don't have a cecum, which is a fermenting vat, and we don't have an appendix, it's just a vestigial structure. So if you take, actually let me go here. Yeah, if you take a rat and a pony and an adult human, the rat has an enormous cecum. The pony has an enormous cecum and colon to ferment the food. Whereas humans have a vestigial cecum and very rudimentary capacity to ferment fiber. So if you look at the energy absorption, because what can happen is that the bacteria will break the fiber into fat, and the amount of energy that you can get, that a dog can get, is 2%. An adult human, by breaking fiber in their colon, can get about 6 to 9%, and a pony can get a whopping 50% of its calories by breaking the fiber in the hindgut. So here is relative gut volume of various hominoid species, and you can see that the gorilla has a very small intestine, about 14%, but a very large colon. The humans have a very large small intestines and a very small colon. So 67 versus 14%. This is designed mostly to absorb high quality food. This is designed mostly to process food from its rudimentary structure and absorb it. So we were trying to classify, is a human a folivore, which is just eating leaves, a vegetarian or a vegan? Is a human a carnivore, or is a human omnivore? So I like this term the best. This is the term that somebody has come up with, which is called humans are cuisinivores. And the reason we are cuisinivores is because we not only know what to eat, but we know how to prepare it properly. We can externalize digestion by hanging meat, by margination, by pounding and grinding. We can improve its palatability by cooking it, improve its digestibility, improve the texture. We can reduce the toxins. And the human gut is designed to absorb a large amount of nutrients in a very small space, which is the small intestines. So here is another comparison for those who want to take a picture. The human colon is roughly the 10% the size of our ape ancestors, and our small intestines is very huge compared to that of our ancestors. Okay, so are you guys with me so far, or this is
No, it's good. It's understandable.
all right?
Great.
If I'm going too fast, you should let me know. So now we need to explore. Now we need to explore and see, are there studies that have been done with a low carb diet versus a high carb diet which has fiber in it, and we need to see what happened. Did these guys do really good? So this gentleman, Binkworth, did a study of low carb, high fat versus high carb, low fat diet. 91 individuals, low carb, high carb. 48 and 43 individuals. They were obese. BMI of 33 means that they're moderately obese, about 75 kilograms over their ideal body weight. For 8 weeks, he made sure that they would eat a low carb or a high carb diet, and at the end he said, I'm going to look at their bowel habits. I'm going to examine the bacteria in their feces, and I'm going to do urine analysis. Okay, so this is what they ate. They ate roughly 6,000 kilojoules. Most of this is animal-based food. You know, there is ham, tuna, beef, chicken. They did have about 13 grams of fiber, either as green vegetables or as some mixed nuts. But the amount of fiber they ate was quite small. The high carb people had some meat, but it was much less. Most of it was based on carbohydrates derived from plant sources. So if you look out here, percent of energy from carbs was 5% versus 50%, fiber about 13 versus 31%, protein was much higher because you're eating animal sourced food, 134 versus 87, fat was 100 versus 50, And when you do that, when you eat a lot of animal sourced food, you will eat a lot of cholesterol. That's another story that we have discussed several times. The fiber was 13 versus 32%. So what happened? So what do you think happened? Now these people are eating an animal sourced food. They're eating very little fiber. Yeah, they lost weight for sure. Both of them are eating a calorie restricted diet.
Maybe
But
they
if-
are constipated too. Man, no
Yes.
fiber.
Yes, so that's what I'm trying to say. So their fecal weight went down from 223 to 162, so they made less feces. The defecation frequency went down a little bit. You would be surprised that people who eat a lot of fiber, although they don't admit it, they have to fart and go a lot. Whereas here, both the frequency of gas emissions and daily bowel movements, they didn't reduce that much, but 1.23, whereas in the high carb, fecal weight did not change and defecation frequency did not change. Okay, so here is the argument that people make that fiber is necessary. See, I told you I want to give you a balanced presentation. I want to make sure that you understand that there is doubt, that there are issues that nobody understands. So when you take fiber is fermented at the end of a digestion in the colon by bacteria, and the bacteria is converting that fiber to short chain fatty acids, and then the short chain fatty acids in turn are feeding our epithelium, they are feeding the colon. So there are scientists who argue that if you don't eat fiber, you don't make butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acids, and if you don't make butyrate, you will destroy the lining of your gut. How true that is, nobody knows. I asked all my colleagues who are experts in infectious disease, in gastroenterology. All of them say, hey, we think that there is something there, that it may be important. So what happened to those? So when they ate this diet, what happened to the fecal concentration of these important fatty acids? So I have butyrate out here, low carb diet went down from 18 to 14 significantly. The total amount of fatty acids went down quite a bit, 102 to 86. And when you look at the fecal excretion, it was also low. But in the high carb group, of course, there was no change in the amount of fatty acids that were produced, either when you measured it in the gut or in the feces. What about the bacteria that are there in the gut? So what happened to the bacteria? So the bacteria did go down, bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, because what we think is that we put in a lot of probiotics. You know, there's a huge market out there saying, I want to take in probiotics, I want to take in beneficial bacteria. And later on you will learn that maybe that's not such a good thing to do. But at least by this strategy you can see that these beneficial bacteria went down in the low carb diet, and high numbers of these bacteria are considered to be important for the health of your colon.
When you mentioned probiotics, you meant supplements.
Yes, supplements that you put in.
Yeah, but not food. That's probiotics.
So that's a prebiotic. You're taking fiber to feed your bacteria. There's a problem with that also if you eat too much of it. Okay, so is there a problem with eating too much protein? Because by the end of this talk, I want you to respect your stomach acid. Stomach acid is highly important for you to break down protein. If you don't have enough stomach acid because you take PPIs, you're old, you're having acid reflux, it's
An alkaline diet too.
that could be possible, although I have not explored that. So if you have these factors, you should cook your protein well because you need to absorb it. You don't want a protein that is not broken down to get into the colon, because undigested protein will be used by the bacteria, and instead of making...
Excuse me, Doc. Quick question. So if you eat rare meat, Is there a danger of that coming into the colon?
That's such a good question.
Thank you.
And I want to take that question now rather than at the end.
Okay.
Because if you want to eat rare meat, you better be very young. You better be making a lot of stomach acid. And you better be eating very little. Because otherwise that meat, if you make it a habit, is going to increase your bacterial content, or you're going to have higher breakdown products of protein. So when you break down protein in the colon, you make what is called branch chain fatty acids. So in other words, I had no idea. Even I had no idea. Sorry, I shouldn't say I, but I've been so involved in this process for 6 years. I'm constantly reading. But I had no idea that the bacteria are so nicely designed that they can convert protein to fat. The fat that they make is called branch chain fatty acids. They make ammonia, they make hydrogen sulfide, they make phenols. And these are potential carcinogens, potential toxins. And fermentation of protein in your colon can cause all of this. In addition, it gets absorbed and you then excrete phenols and cresols in your urine. So what happened in this study? Aren't you excited to know? Yes. So 91 individuals, low carb, high carb, there was no change in fecal branch chain amino acids. In other words, these people did not eliminate too much fatty acids from protein. There was no increase in urinary phenol or cresol, so that means they were not absorbing too many breakdown products. But perhaps it's important to read this. No evidence that higher protein intake was associated with increased levels of potentially deleterious protein fermentation products. Energy restriction may have not enhanced the functional efficiency of small intestines, increasing the absorption of available protein. So in other words, they did such a good job at it, they ate so little that all the protein was absorbed by the small intestines, very little protein got into the colon. So, are you guys thinking that this is something that you want to learn? Because I can shorten it also. Okay, I want to go through this quickly because this section we have covered many times. 70% of the US population is insulin resistant. What that means is that when we eat a carbohydrate load, instead of making so much insulin, we make 2, 3, and 4 patterns of insulin. So in other words, if you test, Dr. Kraft tested 15,000 people, he found that 75% of people with normal blood sugars. So in other words, you go to your doctor and you say, I'm not a diabetic. He says, you're not a diabetic, you're fine, you don't need to worry. But that's wrong, because 75% of people are insulin resistant. If your doctor did the right test and checked your insulin levels, he will find that the insulin levels are higher to keep your blood sugar normal, and that's not a normal situation. If you have a blood sugar that's normal and you have normal levels of insulin, that's the right situation. 75% of Americans are the other way. And when you are insulin resistant, you become diabetic, heart disease, dementia, obesity, you get very hungry, which I'll show you, strokes, cancers, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So what happens is that as you stimulate the pancreas to make more and more insulin, so you're eating this food, many people think that they're eating whole grains and fruits. Yeah, maybe so, but really they're eating junk carbs, refined carbs. Both, if done in excess, can increase your insulin. And when your insulin goes high, your leptin levels which are high, your brain cannot see the leptin. In other words, leptin is a hormone that is elaborated by the fat cells to tell the brain stop eating. But you can't do that because high insulin levels cause leptin resistance, leading to all of this. I'll skip this, but I want to talk to you about this. And this is one of the most important things that I have learned in the last 5 years. And that is that the health of your fat cells, determines how healthy you are. by far, this is one of the most important things. So fat cells are healthy when they are empty. In other words, if fat cells have room to accommodate the fat that you're eating, they are healthy. So they can increase in size, but if you're insulin resistant and you keep packing more and more fat and you can't empty your fat cells, these fat cells then become dead. They say, no more, we can't take any more fat. They die, they get inflamed, and when they die and get inflamed, it leads to fat deposition in the blood vessels, in the heart, in the liver, and it causes inflammation and does all the bad things. Okay, so that was about insulin resistance. We said we need to respect the stomach acid. Why do we need to respect it? Because acid and pepsin together digest the protein along with muscular contractions, and that protein malabsorption, B12 malabsorption can occur. But most importantly, the stomach is an ecological barrier. You cannot underestimate that. Because when you take in food, if you have no acid in here, bacteria will grow, bacteria will go up and go into the lungs, cause pneumonia, or the bacteria will increase in small intestines, which leads to what is called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can be damaging to you. It's been very nicely shown in this paper, in this book called Why Stomach Acid is Good for You, that as you get older, your stomach acid goes down. Another important thing that I'm telling you as to why cooking is very important, why eating raw vegetables may not be as good for you. Okay, so now I have to take the most difficult task of all, which is to describe to you the interaction between the microbiome. So in other words, the bacteria that they live in our gut and us humans. So I thought that there would be no better way to describe it than the branches of government that are designed to protect us. So there's an office of presidency, there is the Congress. It's supposed to protect us from disease like obesity, diabetes, from enemies, foreign and domestic. However, the relationship between Congress and the office of the president does not represent a passive coexistence. They're not just designed to help us. It's rather characterized by a constant, dynamic, and intimate interaction between the highly dynamic and competitive lawmakers. What looks like peaceful coexistence represents a constant struggle to gain power over one another, and the result of a highly powerful special interest group, so that they can improve their own selfish self-interest. So I thought that this would be the best analogy to describe the gut bacteria and us, because many people think that the gut bacteria are basically there to do us all good, that there is nothing bad about them. The more they are, the better it is. Not so. So I don't want to call them symbionts. Symbiont means that they are helping us. I want to call them pathobionts, which means that their role is there to help us, but are they only helping us is not certain. So there's not a good definition for that. Why are they necessary? They are necessary because these bacteria get our stomach and our intestines and our colon ready to fight invaders. And the way they do that is that your defenses, your lymphocytes, your antibodies, your white blood cells are properly activated. In other words, you have a very good Army, Navy, and Marines, or an Air Force, or whatever you have, a group of defenders out here that are promoted by friendly people, by friendly interaction. So instead of looking like that, here you have all these blood cells that can fight infections. So the pathobionts are making us sort of protecting us from invaders. But like we said, there is an interaction, and this interrelationship between enteric bacteria and mucosal immune system does not represent a passive coexistence, just like I talked about the branches of government. It's characterized by constant, dynamic, intimate interaction between highly dynamic and competitive bacteria and our gut lining that is adaptive. It causes constant renewal. Our lining is made new constantly. We have repair mechanisms. So in other words, the microbiome is critical to maintain the epithelial barrier and mature our defenses. So that's how I would describe the interaction. So here it is. This is our gut lining. Here are these bacteria, the microbiome. They're supposed to protect us by making us ready for these pathogens. But we do a lot of things that can disrupt this. Or we can do a lot of things that would make this in excess. Like for example, eat a lot of probiotics. So there are plant products, polyphenols, tannins, lectins, fiber, probiotics that can disrupt the balance. Okay. So when you disrupt the balance, here is a mucus layer, here is the epithelial layer, you cause a break in its integrity. In other words, instead of being tightly bound, gaps are created, and as these gaps are created, you get infiltration of bacteria, of potential antigens, and that creates an inflamed response. That creates a response from our body saying that, hey, these are all these foreign invaders, let's fight them. So that leads to inflammation. And one way to describe inflammation is that an inflamed leaky gut can be because you had a bacteria that came in. And our body is making an antibody. It's an antibody that is there to neutralize the bacteria and kill it. But if this antibody is produced in excess, or if there is really no bacteria out there, instead of killing the bacteria, this antibody can kill our pancreas and cause type 1 diabetes. This antibody, if it's stimulated in excess, can damage our nerve cells and can cause multiple sclerosis. So how many of you have heard that gluten is not good for you?
Yeah, we've heard.
A lot. Do you know why? Okay. So this is a decent way to put it. So gluten affects something called a zonulin protein. So gluten is here. One of the things about gluten is that it breaks down into gliadin, which is another protein. The gliadin then comes and interacts with a receptor on a cell surface. In other words, there is an identifying protein that binds to it. And when it does that, a lot of chemical machinery gets activated and makes zonulin. So what zonulin does is that the lining of our cells is tightly bound together. In other words, there is no gaps in between them, and that is the tight junctions in here. Zonulin comes in and it works on these tight junctions and loosens them. So if you see here, zonulin is working and a gap is created. And when the gap is created, what happens is that all these foreign protein bacteria migrate into the lining of our gut, and they create an inflammatory response. They create a response in which we say, this is war. And war affects not just the person who is being acted on, but it also affects the person who is creating the war. It affects both. So a process like this is not just capable of defending us, but it's also capable of harming us. So if you activate the zonulin through gluten, a group of us can get celiac disease, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, heart disease, and other chronic conditions that are not related to infection. Okay. I'm still doing good with time. So you would say a plant is defenseless, right? How many of you guys think that a plant is completely defenseless? It doesn't have any claws, it cannot run away.
Excuse me, the Venus flytrap has teeth, all right? Okay, so they're not defenseless.
But plants are not defenseless. They have chemical warfare. They create certain anti-nutrients that make the predators respect them. And one of them is called lectins. They're found in red kidney beans. A group of young kids in England consumed these red kidney beans that were uncooked. And when they were uncooked, they have a lot of these lectins that go and bind to a protein on the lining of the gut. And this binding rapidly creates abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration. Some of them ate as less as 4 kidney beans. They had to be hospitalized. They recovered. So one way to show what happens is that this lectin can bind, and here is the red blood cell, can bind to the protein on the red blood cell and cause agglutination. It clumps them together. So that's one of the mechanisms as to what it is doing to the gut lining. It's also studies show that rats fed lectins for as little as 2 weeks, half a percent of their diet died in 2 weeks. So this is from Dr. Mercola. I promised you I'll give you balance. So in other words, I'm not saying, hey, don't eat plants. But here is from his side saying that lectins are present in all of these nightshades and different types of foods, tomatoes included, peppers included. So you would go out here and you'd be scared of going to the shop. You would not want to eat anything.
Absolutely not.
And then there is this one particular physician, Dr. Scott Grundy, who's made a career out of it with the plant paradox. He sells this lectin shield, which is very expensive. So you only need to look in a little further. Is eating red kidney beans bad for us? Man has been eating them for over 2,000 years, at least recorded history. And what happens is that if you take these red kidney beans and you heat them at 100 degrees for about 60 minutes, all these lectins are neutralized. Or if you soak them overnight and heat them, there would not even be even traces of that lectin. So just know that when you are using plant food, that you should cook them. Okay. So how many of you know about polyphenols, flavonoids? So in grape juice, or people eat grape extract. There's somebody who raised their hand. You eat.
I had a question on the last slide. You showed broccoli up there.
Yes.
And so broccoli should be cooked, I guess, too?
I think so. I'm going to get to that at the end. So in other words, grape juice, they have phenols. And these polyphenols, these are compounds that aggregate protein. They clump the protein, and if they're present in higher quantities, they clump it more, and then they clump it so much that the protein cannot be absorbed. And polyphenols are not only found in grains out here, but they're also found in fruits, but also in fruit juices. Okay? So polyphenols are preventing the absorption of protein. The polyphenols are preventing the absorption of iron. So here, this phytic acid, this polyphenol, this soy protein phytate, all of this bind to the iron that is present in food and reduce the bioavailability not only of iron but of several other minerals as well. So in other words, this is also an anti-nutrient. So influence of polyphenol on the digestibility of protein means that they reduce the capacity to absorb protein because they precipitate the protein. In fact, I don't know if any of you has eaten a raw persimmon. Has anybody eaten a raw persimmon? Yes. So what happens? Will you care to describe what happens when you eat a raw? So it feels like your mouth is dry. It's astringent because the tannins bind to the protein in your saliva and they make it dry. So the tannins are anti-nutrients, and here is showing that there is definite evidence that polyphenols reduce the absorption of minerals. But are there benefits of polyphenols? Because polyphenols are considered to be antioxidants. Even though the binding to iron is a drawback, it's a benefit because iron is important oxidant. Yes, it prevents oxidation of LDL, which is supposed to cause heart disease. It also oxidizes vitamin E. or prevents the oxidation of vitamin E, regenerates vitamin E, it prevents heart disease, it prevents cancers, it reduces aging because oxidation is one of the reasons why our skin lags down. So how do we get the polyphenols? So fiber is fermented by the bacteria in the colon, it releases polyphenols, the polyphenols act in the colon, but they can also be absorbed. Would it be surprising to you to know that how much absorption of polyphenols is there is completely vague? The studies are so few. How much of these antioxidants we are absorbing, we don't know. And once you absorb them, are they really effective as antioxidants? We don't know that either.
So Doc, is wine an antioxidant?
It's considered to be, but is it really? Okay. So what is a free radical? What is an antioxidant? So what's happening is that this is a healthy cell or healthy atom, and the free radical comes in and takes away its electron. And here is an antioxidant. It's a good guy with nice glasses, and it comes and says, hey, let me just give you back the electron. So that's what an antioxidant is. Okay.
Maybe the antioxidant is only just for the plant. It's not for the person eating. It's to help the plant itself.
And there are many, and
if we ingest that, it's going to help us. But
and
it's not really.
so what gentleman is saying is that the antioxidant is there to help the plant, not necessarily help us. And many of the people who promote total carnivory or animal sourced food promote that. So I'm going to rush through this because this is one of the first times I have given this talk. So timing, I have to do it right. But this is a very important study, so I just need your indulgence for a few minutes. So people think, just like we thought cholesterol is static, that it remains at the same level for years and years, doesn't go up and down in a few days. We used to think that the gut microbiome, the bacteria that we have is static. It's not going to change. But that's not so. It says diet rapidly and reproducibly alters human gut microbiome. So this is a 5-day study. For 5 days, people were given either a plant-based diet, about 10 individuals, or they were given an animal-based diet. So for 5 days plant-based, 5 days animal-based, they checked fatty acids, they did cultures, they looked at bile acids, and they wanted to see whether bacteria change. So these were people with a body mass index from normal to a little bit obese. And this was a really well designed study, because if you look at the amount of fiber, the people on plant-based were eating a whopping 44 grams, 0 grams on the animal-based diet. Fat 22 versus 70, protein 10 versus 30. So this could not be more plant-based vegan diet versus a total animal-based diet. What happened to weight loss? This is just a 5-day study. A 5-day study, both of them are eating the equal amount of calories. Who do you think lost more weight? The animal-based group lost more weight. Statistically significant by day 4, you could see it. Day 4 and 5 compared to the plant-based diet. So what happens? So you have this colon, you're fermenting fiber, and if you ferment fiber in the colon, and what do you make?
Gas.
Well, you make gas, but what nutrient do you make? Because we went through that earlier, remember? You ferment fiber, the cows ferment fiber and make fat. So here they fermented fiber and made fat, but the animal sourced food people ate animal, and some of that protein will get into the colon undigested, and when bacteria work on protein, they will make a different kind of a fat. They're called branch chain fatty acids. So you can see out here that people on a plant-based diet, they had more of the butyrate, which is the different kind of fatty acid, whereas the people on the plant-based diet had less of the butyrate. This is supposed to be something that is feeding the colon. On the other hand, this is protein breakdown fatty acid. Protein breakdown fatty acid was higher in the animal-based group compared to the plant-based group. Now nobody knows nobody knows whether our colon can also use this versus this. So when you are making more of this, you select out different bacteria, which is called Bilophila and Alice types and stuff like that. On the other hand, if you're fermenting fiber, you will select out saccharolytic bacteria, bacteria like Prevotella and stuff like that. So these are different bacteria that can either break down fiber versus break down protein. So here it is showing, and this is a very important paper if anybody is interested to look at, that there was a number of bacteria that went up on the animal sourced food diet, including Alice types and Basophilia, as well as bacteroids. And the only reason I'm saying that is that this microbial activity is very similar to the microbial activity that you can see in a carnivore versus an herbivore. So in other words, in 5 days, our human body is so amazing that it can change the bacteria depending on the diet that you're eating. Now, if you're eating a lot of animal-based food, you're eating a lot of fat. When you eat a lot of fat, you need to make more of the bile acids. So plant-based diet people made less bile acids because they're eating less fat, whereas animal-based people, because they were eating more fat, made more bile acids. How does the body balance cholesterol absorption versus elimination? So the body makes its own cholesterol, it can absorb cholesterol from food, but it cannot use cholesterol as fuel. It cannot use cholesterol as sugar or protein or fat. How does it get rid of the cholesterol?
Bile.
By bile. So obviously they're making more bile, right? Okay, so here it is summarizing. The gut microbiome rapidly responds to changes in diet. That bile acid resistant bacteria are selected when you're eating an animal sourced food. Weight loss is more with animal sourced food. Cholesterol production elimination increases with animal sourced food. Certain bacteria capable of causing human disease are selected with animal sourced food. I had to put that in for balance because that's what the paper claims, and that's what my friends who are gastroenterologists, who are infectious disease people are saying that. But also you need to make sure you understand that you're making less gas and you're spending a lot less time defecating or spending time in the bathroom. Okay, so one more minute. Sorry, I didn't realize that this was so important.
Take two.
Take two, thank you. The best diet, the best part about a diet is not eating. So in other words, there is nothing, there's no diet that will work if you're not doing intermittent fasting, because impact of intermittent fasting is tremendous on the brain. It makes new brain cells in the hippocampus, which promotes memory and association. It increases our parasympathetic tone. So parasympathetic tone is one in which as the parasympathetic tone goes up, your blood pressure comes down, your heart rate comes down, your heart rate variability improves. These are all good things. It improves the health of your blood vessels by doing all of these things, including glucose, insulin. It improves your heart, like I just pointed out, by reducing blood pressure and reducing heart rate. And it improves the health of your fat cells. The reason it improves the health of your fat cells is because it empties it. An empty fat cell is healthy because it makes more adiponectin. This is a hormone that a happy fat cell is releasing, saying that, hey, I'm good. I can take in more fat as you eat. So fasting is one of the most important things that you can do. All right. There is a vitamin B12 argument as why you should use animal sourced food alone. There is an essential fatty acid argument because essential fatty acids, EPA and DHA, are only found in animal sourced food, tuna, grass-fed meat, grass-fed cheese. Plant-based omega-3 is ALA, and although walnuts have a lot of it, the body does not convert ALA to DHA and EPA, which is what our brain needs. So I'm going to now skip to my summary slide, and let's spend some time on it. Because we spent an hour discussing what's the optimal diet for humans. So I think that an optimal diet for humans is predominantly animal based, because protein is more complete. We didn't talk about taurine, but it's an amino acid that is not found in plant that we need for health. For the fatty acids, the omega-3s, for B12, animal fat is more tolerant of cucinivory. When you cook, animal fat tolerates that better. I think that we should eat protein in moderation, because I'm concerned about protein putrefaction in the colon, perhaps not desirable. I think we should cook our protein, especially as we get older. There is no diet that I can recommend without fasting, because fasting helps us by improving the health of our fat cells. If our fat cells are happy, we are happy. I think we should minimize starches and sugar, because our pancreas is simply not designed to handle that load. Now, my position on fiber is changing. I used to say fiber totally unessential, but now I'm saying, hey, maybe the gut microbiome may be partially important. Have about 20 grams of fiber, but make sure, like somebody asked out here in the audience, that you boil it, steam it, okay, and individualize, because not all of us are similar. There are people who are so intolerant of any plant food that they get rapidly sick, and some people are lactose intolerant, and some people may have issues with animal food also. So individualizing is important. So I think that's all I had, and I'm here to answer any questions.
All right.
Sorry it took so long.
That was great. That was perfect.
So most of the animals we get these days, including fish and
You
everything,
should tell
we
me.
really don't know whether it is wild or it's been farmed or it's been fed with all the hormones and all that. So if we have those cheaper ones rather than going organic, which is 5 times the cost of whatever we get in the market, will it affect or do not affect?
So the question is that, do you need to do grass-fed and grass-fed beef and wild-caught animals and free-range chickens and stuff like that? So there is a short answer to it, but I want to tell you, I want you to go to my YouTube channel and look at a presentation which says a tribute to Peter Ballerstad. Okay, the thing is that I no longer advise people to buy grass-fed meat, grass-fed cheese, or wild-caught fish, because the degree of benefit that you get, I think, is not worth 5 times the expense. If you are very rich, by all means do it, because the difference in the omega-3 is very small. I might as well, like I take an omega-3 pill. That's what I tell my patients to do. Just go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned the supplement of probiotics. I take a supplement. Is this just not necessary?
Well, of course, another thing I forgot to tell is that I'm not giving individual medical advice, but I think I would be a little concerned about taking probiotics, because the probiotic has to go through your gastric acid. Those bacteria should not disturb the lining of your small intestines, because that is an important place where you're absorbing things, and then act in the colon. And are you creating too much of an imbalance? You're increasing the pathobionts to such a degree that you may cause some inflammation. And there are some papers that show that taking too much probiotics has caused inflammation, has caused increased ammonia production, even affected the brain function. So I would say humbly that I would be concerned. Yes, go ahead.
You're eating meats with vegetables, some of the vegetables are off limits. Outside of the starchy vegetables, all those off limit ones are bad ones, as long as you cook them, they're okay?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree with that. So the question is that the starchy vegetables will increase the amount of sugar,
Right, those are out.
and they'll affect your pancreas. But what about the non-starchy leafy green vegetables, broccoli, etc., peppers? I think that as long as you cook them, you will get rid of the lectins. The phenols, the polyphenols may be good for you, I don't know. So, and the fiber is probably good for you to some degree. So I have no problems. I think you made the right statement.
So to increase your stomach acid, I'm trying to translate this into my head. To increase the stomach acid is a good thing. By doing that, you eat meats. Correct?
No.
Or eat cholesterol. You said that the cholesterol increases the acid? The food doesn't affect it. Okay. Is there a way to increase your stomach acid
That's the
naturally
question.
or no?
I'm not sure. When you eat meat, you need acid to digest it. And your body will make the amount of acid that is usually necessary unless you're eating too much meat. Or what you're doing is that you're eating meat with a lot of fiber, because then that fiber is going to neutralize the acid. Or like people do is that they eat the salad first and then they eat the steak later. And I think that is fundamentally wrong thing to do.
I found if I take my pink salt a little bit before I'm eating my food, that will help create the hydrochloric acid. And all day long I'm drinking.
There are all kinds of things that people take before they eat meat to improve their stomach acid production, and I need to look into that more.
That would be great, Zach. That would help me a lot.
All right, this was good. This was a new talk, a brand new talk. I mean, I had never done this before. It has lots of information. You guys need to process it. I'll be here for a little while longer to answer questions individually. But
Be on your,
yeah, I'm going to, I really think that this is an important talk, so I'm going to post it very soon on our YouTube channel.